You know, you hear this idea that everyone's creative. That's a lie. It's as straightforward as that. True creativity is very, very rare. And so, and if you happen to be a creative person, or if you happen to be someone who's profoundly interested in ideas, you are in a pronounced minority. Just as you are if you happen to be extremely extroverted, or extremely agreeable, or extremely conscientious. These are minority issues. And what you do is you find like-minded people who are capable of engaging that. You know, heavyweight weightlifters compete with heavyweight weightlifters for a reason, and everyone thinks that's fine. And the same thing applies to intellectual and creative endeavors. So what you do is you try to find a community where that's the nature of the community, and you likely have to find a relationship like that as well. You know, so I don't think so. I think what contributes to the siloing is the arrogance that goes along with it. Because if you can be interested in ideas and you can be creative. Well, that's the arrogance of the intellect, right? That's the thing the Catholic Church had warned about for centuries, is the arrogance of the intellect. So, because if you're wise as well as smart, and there is no relationship between being smart and being wise, they are not the same thing. There's no quick pathway from smart to wise. And many of the people who I've known who were very wise some of them were intellectually impaired and were still wise, you know. So it's the arrogance that brings up the block. And I see this, for example, happening in the United States in particular, because the last time I went down there, for example, I had friends down there, and some of those friends are very, very smart people, and some of them were talking about the Trump voters, and they were talking about the Trump voters with contempt. And I thought, you better watch that, because that's 50% of the damn population. And it might be convenient to think that they're stupid and beneath you, but it's not conducive to a civil state. And there's no evidence that it's true, because there isn't a straight line between intelligent and wise. And so I think that if your character is developed and you're intelligent, you can have your siloed creative community, but you develop enough wisdom so that you can see all the things that people can do that are of high ethical utility, that are outside the intellectual domain. You know, and I think that's why in the New Testament, I think that's why Christ is a carpenter. Right? Because, well, first of all, a carpenter is one of those jobs that when you're dishonest, it manifests itself immediately, because what you build falls down. And so if you're an honest carpenter, you build a good house. So there's a nice metaphor there. But it's also a warning, in some sense, against the equation of intellectual brilliance with moral superiority. And so if the intellects would drop their moral superiority, and fat chance there is of that, then the divide between the working class, say, and the elite would resolve. And there's every reason to have respect for decent working class people. I mean, it's on their labor, as the left-wingers at least hypothetically agree, that the entire edifice of the culture is resting. So you can have your cake and eat it too, but you have to not assume that your niche makes you superior. And it's very difficult for smart people, especially smart. There's this scene in Nietzsche's, it's in Thus Spake Zarathustra, where Zarathustra, the prophet, comes down from the mountain, and he comes into a public square, and there's this crowd around this little midget who's only about this high, who has a gigantic ear, and everyone is marveling at him. Well, that's what the modern intellect is like. It's a midget with a giant, well, mouth generally, not an ear. And the being is underdeveloped, but the intellect is hyper activated. And it makes the person extraordinarily unbalanced. And it's partly because they can't compete outside the intellectual realm. And that makes them very bitter, because they tend to think, well, God, I'm so smart, everything should just come to me. It's like, sorry, that's not how the world works. And it also, that attitude is immediately evident to people that they're talking to when they talk in the manner that they talk, if they are arrogant intellectuals of that sort. You see that in The Simpsons did a good job of that with Comic Book Guy, right? I mean, he completely useless in every possible dimension with an IQ of about 160. And it's very annoying to people who have an IQ of 160 that they can also be completely useless. But it happens a lot. So, yeah. Okay, so the question is that the totalitarian forms that we've seen primarily in the past have been male, but maybe we're seeing something different now. I really don't think it's different. I think it's of a common kind that's expanded in its dominion. So you imagine that there's an essential feminine pathology, just as there is an essential masculine pathology. And the essential feminine pathology Freud mapped out. It's the Oedipal mother. And the Oedipal mother is the mother that gets too close to her children, right? And intermingles herself with them to too great a degree that in her attempts to protect them undermines them fatally. And so there's a classic representation of feminine in the West, and the classic representation is Mary. And here's one of the representations. It's lovely, and it's derived, at least in part, from the story of Mary and the snake in the Garden of Eden. And so Mary has her foot on a serpent, and she's holding Christ off to the side, like this. Well, that's exactly what mothers have always done. It's a biological portrait of human women, is they hold their infants out of the reach of the terrible serpentine predator. Obviously, that's what we do. Well, that's fine. But adults aren't infants. And neither are children. And if you treat them like they are, you undermine them. You pathologize them. You turn them into old infants. That's an ugly thing. And that's the Freudian nightmare. You know, and this happens in therapy very frequently. I mean, you can be tangled into a terrible relationship with your father. That's often either because he was absent, abusive, or tyrannical, something like that. But the standard pathology with mom is she did everything for you. Well, what's left for you to do? Nothing, including never leaving. Right. And that's the motivation, you know, for the woman who's nothing but protective mother. There's no role outside of nurturant of nurturer of infants. Well, you just keep them infants. They'll never leave. They might kill you one night in your sleep, but they'll never leave.
Can you connect back to what we're seeing in terms of identity?
Sure. I mean, it's so comical watching the feminists, postmodernists in particular, rattle on about the absence of gender reality and act out the archetypal devouring mother at exactly the same time. For them, the world is divided into predators and infants. And the predators are evil and need to be stopped, and the infants need to be cared for. Well, that's what the mother does. But adults are not infants. And all you do is destroy them when you treat them that way, especially when they're adolescents and just starting to develop. You know, there's a rule that I attempted to abide by when I had small children, and the rule was, don't do anything for your children that they can do themselves. And that's annoying, that rule, because it takes you like 15 seconds to dress a 2-year-old, but you let the 2-year-old dress himself, it's 15 minutes, or 20 minutes, or half an hour. You chase them around the house. But if you let them learn to dress themselves, then you don't have to dress them anymore, and they can do it. And you do that with setting the table, and you do that with everything. It's like, no, it's okay, you do that now. Well, I care for you so much, let me do that for you. It's like, I don't care for you at all when I say that. I don't care for you at all. I'm going to stop doing everything I possibly can for you as rapidly as I possibly can. Say, well, that's great. That's how you work in an old age home. Do not do anything for the inhabitants that they can do themselves, because you rob them of the last vestiges of their independence, right? It's what you do when you're a manager. If you're a good manager, you make yourself superfluous by extending autonomy and independence to the people that you manage so that they can take over the whole job. You don't do that by doing everything for people. And you certainly don't do that by dividing the world archetypally and uncritically into predators, those who have more, and victims, infants, those who have nothing, and acting like all you can ever do is protect them. You don't protect, first of all, you can't protect people. You can only make them strong. That's it. You cannot protect them. You can make them strong, and then they can protect themselves. But then they don't need you. Right, and there's the underground pathological element of the devouring mother. It's like, never leave me. Here's the deal. I'll do everything for you.
You just never leave. Right. That's sleeping with your mother. Right. That's the Freudian nightmare. Right. You don't invite your child into your bed. Right. You distinguish between them and you. You distinguish between them and your husband. And you facilitate their independence. A part of the reason why it's useful to have a mother and a father is because the mother has to fall insanely in love with the infant or she'd throw it out the window, right? Because they're insanely demanding and they're always right, right? Because the right way to treat an infant, especially before 9 months, is I'll do everything for you and you're always right and your needs take priority over everyone else's, and anybody that threatens you is terrible. Exactly right. But after, once the kid is ambulatory and starting to be independent, that's the wrong attitude. The attitude then is, get the hell on with it. And men who are less prone to negative emotion and less compassionate are much better at fostering that kind of independence. And so it's usually then when they step into the family and start playing with the kids, rough and tumble play, and pushing them forward and saying, get on with it, you can do it, you can do it. And it's very hard for a mother to play both those roles because she has to fall so in love with her infant that it's difficult for her to be like universal caregiver and disciplinarian at the same time. Because the roles run contrary to one another. And so now women have entered the political sphere, right, en masse. And so they're going to bring their essential nature with them, all the while saying there's no such thing as essential nature. It's like, yeah, there is.